I never imagined that the very first paycheck of my life would not even belong to me. When I walked out of the office on that Friday evening, I was shaking with excitement, clutching the envelope as if it were a treasure chest. My heart was pounding with pride, because I had worked for this money with my own hands, my own late nights, my own effort. I thought my life was finally about to change. I pictured myself giving a little gift to my mom, maybe even surprising my sister with something nice, showing them that I could finally contribute. But what actually happened turned my world upside down and left me questioning if I even mattered to my family at all. When I was younger, I used to believe that once I got a real job, everything at home would be better. My family didn't have much, and my mom always said we needed to support each other. I took her words seriously. So when I started at this new company, I told myself I would work harder than anyone else. The first days were exhausting, but I never complained. Every morning I dressed neatly, tried to smile, and pushed myself to do well. I thought I was laying the foundation for a future where I could finally be respected, both at work and at home. Growing up, my older sister was always the center of attention. She was the one who got the compliments, the special meals, the protective words from my mom. I was the quiet one, the one who followed instructions, the one who blended into the background. But deep inside, I always dreamed that one day I would step out of her shadow. This job was supposed to be my moment. For once, I would bring something to the table that was mine, earned with my own sweat, not handed to me like so many things were to her. On my first day, I felt like I had stepped into another world. The office building was tall and polished, filled with people who seemed so confident. I was nervous, but I kept reminding myself that I belonged there too. My manager gave me tasks that at first felt overwhelming, but I learned quickly, and soon I was staying late to prove myself. Every night, I came home tired but hopeful, dreaming of the day I would collect that first paycheck. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about proving that I could stand on my own feet. I started making little plans in my head. Maybe I would save a portion for school courses, maybe buy a better pair of shoes for work. I even considered treating myself to a small meal in a cafe, something I never allowed before. It was silly, but that paycheck felt like a ticket to independence, a piece of freedom that I had earned. I wanted my mom to be proud of me, to look at me and say, "Finally, you are making something of yourself." I longed for that recognition more than anything. When the big day came, I woke up with a smile on my face. At the office, I could hardly concentrate because I kept thinking about that envelope. When it was finally placed in my hands, I almost cried. The paper felt heavy, not because of the money inside, but because of what it represented. It was the result of countless mornings of doubt, countless nights of effort. I held it close to my chest as I walked home, imagining the look on my mom's face when I showed her. I walked into the house with my head high, expecting maybe even a hug or a word of congratulations. Instead, my mother barely looked at me. My sister was lounging on the couch as if she owned the place, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. I told them I had something important, and I handed my mom the envelope, thinking she would share in my happiness. What happened next shattered that image in an instant. Without even opening it, my mom passed the envelope straight to my sister. She didn't ask me if it was okay. She didn't even glance at me. She just said something about how my sister needed it more and that I should understand. My heart stopped. I stood there frozen, unable to speak. My sister tore open the envelope, grinning as if it had always belonged to her. She looked at me and laughed, saying I was just the helper, and that I should be proud to support the family this way. In that moment, it felt like the walls of the house were closing in on me. Everything I had dreamed of, everything I had worked for, was stripped away in seconds. I felt invisible, like all my effort meant nothing. My mom didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge me, didn't even thank me. I was shaking, trying to hold back tears, but inside I was screaming. That paycheck was not just money, it was proof that I had value. And yet to them, I was nothing more than a shadow. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, wondering why I wasn't enough. Why was my sister always the favorite, always the one who deserved everything, while I was expected to give and give until there was nothing left of me? I told myself, maybe next time would be different. Maybe my mom would realize what she had done. But deep down, I felt the sting of betrayal settle into my chest. The next morning, I woke up and forced myself to go back to work. At the office, nobody knew what had happened the night before. They smiled at me, asked how I was doing, and I pretended everything was fine. But inside, I felt broken. I looked at my colleagues and wondered if they too carried invisible burdens home. Did they also hide the pain of being unwanted, unappreciated? I tried to bury those thoughts and focus on my tasks, but the weight followed me everywhere. The days passed and the resentment grew stronger. Every time I handed over another paycheck, I felt a piece of myself slip away. My sister spent the money on clothes and nights out, flaunting her lifestyle, while I wore the same old shoes to the office. My mom always defended her, saying she had more needs, more potential. And I began to wonder if she had all the potential, then what did that make me? Was I just the background character in their lives? I stopped expecting praise at home. I stopped waiting for recognition. Instead, I poured myself into work even harder. The office became my escape, the only place where I felt like maybe I mattered. My manager began to notice my dedication, giving me more responsibilities, trusting me with bigger tasks. For the first time, I felt like I was growing, like I had a place where my efforts were seen. It became the only thing that kept me going. But every time I returned home, reality hit me again. My paycheck was gone before I could even touch it. My dreams of independence felt like a joke. My sister mocked me openly, calling me the family worker, the little servant who existed to make her life easier. My mom never corrected her, never told her to stop. It was as if I had become invisible, a machine that produced money but had no heart, no soul. I began to keep secrets from them. I hid small amounts of money whenever I could, just a few bills tucked away in a notebook or beneath my mattress. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of control, a little flame of hope that maybe one day I could break free. Still, the guilt ate at me. I wondered if I was wrong for wanting something for myself, if maybe my mother was right, and I was supposed to give everything without expecting anything back. The conflict between my two worlds tore me apart. At work, I was slowly being seen as someone valuable. At home, I was reduced to nothing. That contradiction gnawed at me, leaving me exhausted. I kept smiling at the office, but when I came home, I cried in silence. I didn't know how much longer I could live like this, caught between who I wanted to be and who they forced me to be. Looking back, I realized that first paycheck was the spark that lit everything that followed. It was the moment when I understood that love in my family was not equal, and maybe it never had been. It was the first real betrayal I had felt so clearly, and it burned into me a lesson I didn't want to learn. That night, as I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, one thought repeated in my mind over and over again. If I wanted to matter, if I wanted to be more than invisible, I would have to fight for it myself. And little did I know, that fight was only just beginning, because what awaited me at work in the months ahead would change the course of my life in ways I never could have predicted. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that maybe my mom would realize how unfair she had been. But as the weeks turned into months, nothing changed. Each time I brought my paycheck home, she took it without hesitation and gave it straight to my sister. It became routine, almost like a cruel ritual. I would walk through the door, hand over the envelope, and watch as my sister opened it with a smirk. It was as if my hard work existed only to feed her lifestyle, while I was left with nothing but exhaustion and bitterness. What hurt the most was not just the money itself, but the way they treated me. My mom never once asked how work was going, never asked if I needed anything. My sister, on the other hand, paraded around with new clothes, expensive makeup, and gadgets, bought with the very salary I had earned. She flaunted them in front of me, laughing as if to remind me of my place. She called me the worker bee, the little provider, the one who was useful only because I brought in money she could spend. At night, when I lay in bed, I replayed the same question in my mind. Why am I not enough? Why doesn't she see me? I thought maybe if I worked even harder, maybe if I earned more, they would finally acknowledge me. But no matter how much I gave, their attitude never changed. It was as though my existence had been reduced to an envelope of cash. Nothing more, nothing less. At work, however, things were different. I had found a rhythm. My manager noticed my persistence and gave me tasks that required responsibility. I stayed late often, not because I had to, but because it made me feel alive. I was building something of my own, brick by brick, even if nobody at home cared. Colleagues began to rely on me, and for the first time in my life, people actually looked at me as someone capable, someone who mattered. Still, the contrast between work and home tore me apart inside. Every time someone at the office praised me, I couldn't help but hear my sister's mocking voice in the back of my mind. Every time a manager trusted me with a new project, I remembered the way my mom brushed me aside, as if my accomplishments were meaningless. It was like living two separate lives. One where I was slowly being recognized, and one where I was invisible. I tried to talk to my mom once. I gathered my courage and asked her why she kept giving my money away. I told her I needed it for my future, for school, for my own survival. She didn't even look at me. She said my sister had more important needs, that I should understand because I was younger, stronger, and would manage somehow. It was like a knife to my chest. My voice cracked as I tried to argue, but she dismissed me with a wave of her hand as if my words didn't matter. That night I cried until my pillow was soaked. I realized I was never going to win her approval, no matter how much I gave. My sister was the chosen one, the one who deserved everything without lifting a finger. I was just the provider, the background character, the one expected to sacrifice without complaint. The weight of that realization crushed me, but at the same time, a new fire began to burn inside me. I started to see my work differently. It wasn't just a job anymore, it was my lifeline, my way out. Every task I completed, every challenge I overcame, felt like a step towards something bigger. Something that could one day free me from the prison of my own home. I stopped hoping for validation from my family and began to focus on building a future where I wouldn't need it. But even as I tried to harden my heart, the humiliation didn't stop. My sister began to tell neighbors and relatives that I was working just to support her. She painted herself as the one with potential, the one destined for greatness, while I was simply her shadow, her servant. People believed her because my mother always stood by her side. I became the silent one, the one nobody asked about, the one everyone overlooked. At times I wanted to give up. I wanted to quit my job, stop bringing in money, just to prove a point. But then I would remember the feeling I got at the office, the spark of pride when someone thanked me for my hard work. That spark was the only thing that kept me going. It reminded me that even if my family didn't see me, the world outside might. I started staying at the office even later, not just because of the workload, but because I didn't want to go home. Home wasn't a place of rest anymore. It was a place where my soul was drained, where every bit of me was dismissed. At work, even in silence, I felt a sense of belonging. I began to dream, not just of surviving, but of escaping, of creating a life where I wouldn't be trapped by my family's choices. And then one day, I overheard my manager talking about the company's annual event. It was supposed to be a huge celebration, with awards and recognition for employees who stood out during the year. The thought of it made my stomach twist. I knew people like me didn't get recognized. I was just another worker, invisible in the crowd. But a small part of me couldn't stop imagining what it would feel like to be noticed, to have someone finally see the effort I had poured into this job. I didn't dare tell my family about the event. I knew they wouldn't care, or worse, they would mock me for even thinking I could matter. My sister would probably laugh and say I would end up serving drinks instead of being honored. So I kept it to myself, secretly counting the days, not because I expected anything, but because it gave me something to look forward to. The closer the event drew, the more restless I became. At night, lying in bed, I pictured the stage, the lights, the applause. I told myself it was just a fantasy, that I shouldn't expect anything. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, my time was coming. And without realizing it, those whispers of hope became the thread that carried me forward, pushing me to work harder, to give my best, as if preparing for something I couldn't yet see but desperately wanted to believe in. The week of the company's annual event arrived, and the entire office buzzed with excitement. People talked about what they were going to wear, who might win awards, and how grand the celebration would be. I smiled politely whenever the topic came up, but inside I felt like an imposter. I was sure no one would even notice me. I was the quiet worker, the one who blended into the background. Still, a small piece of me secretly hoped that maybe I would at least hear a kind word that night, some acknowledgement that my endless hours and sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. At home, the atmosphere was very different. My sister caught wind of the event, though I hadn't told her. She laughed when she mentioned it, saying I would probably just be a seat filler, someone to clap for the real achievers. My mom chuckled along with her, as if it were the funniest thing in the world. I bit my tongue, refusing to argue, but their words echoed in my mind for days. Every time I thought about the event, I heard their voices mocking me. The night before, I stood in front of my small mirror, holding up the only dress I had, a plain one I had worn countless times. It was nothing compared to the glamorous outfits I knew my colleagues would wear. For a moment, I thought about not going at all. Why should I show up just to feel invisible in another crowd? But then I reminded myself that the event was about work, about effort, and no matter how I looked, my dedication was real. I laid the dress out carefully, determined to go, even if it hurt. The evening of the event came, and my heart pounded as I walked into the grand hall. It was more breathtaking than I had imagined. Chandeliers sparkled above, music played softly, and the room was filled with laughter and clinking glasses. My colleagues looked stunning, confident, and full of life. I felt small, out of place, like a shadow moving through a world too bright for me. Still, I kept my head up, forcing myself to smile as I found my seat. I sat quietly, listening as people greeted each other and shared stories of their accomplishments. Some had families with them, parents or partners who beamed with pride. I sat alone, knowing that even if I had invited my family, they wouldn't have come. Or worse, they would have come only to belittle me in front of everyone. I tried to push the thought away and focus on the stage, where the ceremony was about to begin. The CEO stepped forward, his voice carrying through the room with authority and warmth. He welcomed everyone, thanked them for their hard work, and spoke about the company's growth over the year. My chest tightened as he talked about recognition, about rewarding those who had gone above and beyond. The air in the room shifted. Everyone leaned forward, waiting to hear the names. I sat back, certain mine would never be called. As the first awards were announced, applause filled the hall. Colleagues beamed with pride as they walked to the stage, shaking hands and posing for photos. I clapped politely, though my hands trembled slightly. Each name called made me feel smaller, as if the distance between me and that stage was a wall I could never climb. But then something unexpected happened. The CEO paused, scanning the room before speaking again. His voice grew softer, more deliberate, as if he wanted every person to truly listen. He began to describe someone who had shown remarkable dedication, someone who worked tirelessly, often behind the scenes without seeking attention. He spoke about quiet strength, about resilience, about how sometimes the most valuable people were the ones who did their work silently, without fanfare. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I wondered if he was describing me. I shook the thought away, convinced it was my imagination. But then he said my name, clear, unmistakable, echoing through the grand hall. My heart stopped and the room seemed to spin. People turned to look at me, their faces filled with curiosity and surprise. I froze, unable to move as the applause began. It felt like the world had slowed down, like time itself had paused to wait for me. I stood up on shaky legs, my palms damp with sweat, and forced myself to walk toward the stage. Every step felt unreal, like I was dreaming. The lights were blinding, the applause overwhelming. I reached the CEO, who smiled warmly as he shook my hand. He handed me a certificate and spoke about my dedication, my willingness to go above and beyond, my quiet strength that had inspired others without me even realizing it. My chest ached with emotion as his words washed over me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, truly seen, not as the background character, not as the helper, but as someone who mattered. I looked out at the crowd, and to my shock, I saw my mother and sister sitting near the back. My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected them to come. Their faces were unreadable, frozen in silence, as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. I turned back to the microphone, my hands trembling as I held it. I hadn't prepared a speech. I never thought I would be standing there. But as I looked at the faces before me, I knew I had to speak. My voice quivered as I thanked my colleagues, my manager, and the CEO for believing in me. I spoke about how much it meant to be recognized, how often people like me worked in silence, unnoticed, but never gave up. My words poured out, raw and honest, straight from the heart. The audience listened in silence, then erupted into applause. Tears burned my eyes, but I smiled through them. In that moment, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the shadow. I was someone who had fought quietly, endured silently, and finally been seen. And as I stepped down from the stage, clutching the certificate to my chest, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Because this recognition was not just about an award. It was a doorway opening to a future where I could finally step out of the shadows and into my own light. When I sat back down after leaving the stage, my hands still trembled, and I could feel the heat in my face from the lights and the overwhelming applause. I clutched the certificate tightly against my chest as though it might disappear if I let it go. For the first time, I had proof that my hard work had value, that I mattered in ways no one at home had ever admitted. I could barely process what had just happened. My heart raced, my mind spun, and yet, a deep calm began to bloom inside me. Something inside had shifted forever. I looked across the hall again, and my eyes landed on my mother and sister. They were still seated at the back, their expressions stiff, unreadable, but filled with something I had never seen before: shock. My sister's mouth was slightly open, as if she couldn't accept what had just happened. My mother sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting around nervously, as if she hoped no one would notice her. For years they had acted as though I was invisible, but now in front of everyone, I was the one standing in the spotlight. The rest of the ceremony continued, but I could hardly hear it. My thoughts circled around what had just unfolded. Every late night, every moment I swallowed my pride, every paycheck I handed over without a word, it all felt like it had led to this very moment. And now there was no denying it. The company saw me. The CEO saw me. Everyone in that room had clapped for me, not for my sister, not for my mother, but for me. After the speeches and awards, the event turned into a celebration. People came up to congratulate me, shaking my hand, smiling warmly. My colleagues, who had always seemed so confident, told me they admired my persistence, that I inspired them. I couldn't believe it. I had always thought of myself as the quiet one in the corner, unnoticed and unremarkable. But here they were, telling me I mattered, that they had seen me all along. Eventually, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and saw my mother standing there, her face pale, her eyes avoiding mine. Beside her, my sister crossed her arms, glaring. My mom cleared her throat and muttered a half-hearted congratulations, as if the words pained her to say. My sister, however, couldn't stay quiet. She sneered and said it must have been a mistake, that I wasn't cut out for recognition. Her voice dripped with bitterness, as if my success had stolen something from her. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink back. I looked her in the eye, steady and calm, and simply said, "It wasn't a mistake." The confidence in my own voice surprised even me. I realized then that I no longer needed their approval. Their opinion of me didn't define me anymore. For too long, I had allowed their voices to silence mine. But standing in that hall, with my award in hand, I knew I had broken free from their hold. The night ended, but the impact of it lingered inside me. As I walked home alone under the streetlights, I replayed everything in my mind. The applause, the CEO's words, the faces in the crowd, it all felt like a dream. Yet, with every step, it became more real. I wasn't the same girl who had walked into that hall earlier. I was no longer the invisible one. I had stepped into a new version of myself, one who could no longer be dismissed. When I entered the house later that night, the silence was heavy. My sister stormed into her room without a word, slamming the door behind her. My mom sat at the table, her face tired, her eyes not meeting mine. For once, she didn't take my envelope, didn't ask for my money, didn't demand anything. She looked smaller, as if the weight of her choices had finally settled on her shoulders. I didn't say a word. I simply walked past her, holding my certificate close, knowing that my life was no longer tied to her approval. In the days that followed, things began to change. At work, I was given more responsibilities, entrusted with projects I had never imagined handling. People looked at me differently now, not just as the quiet worker, but as someone capable of leadership. My confidence grew with every passing day, and at home, the silence from my family became louder than their words ever had been. They didn't mock me anymore, but they also didn't know how to treat me. It was as if they realized I had slipped beyond their control. The shift wasn't just external, it was inside me too. I no longer begged for their attention or sought their validation. I no longer felt guilty for wanting a life of my own. I started saving more seriously, not just hiding a few bills here and there, but planning for a future where I could move out, live independently, and build a life free from the shadows of favoritism. My sister still tried to provoke me sometimes, throwing little jabs, making bitter comments, but they no longer pierced me the way they once had. They rolled off me like water, because I knew the truth now. The recognition I had earned wasn't luck or a mistake. It was the result of every tear I had shed, every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had kept going when I wanted to give up. It was mine and no one could take it away. The CEO even stopped by my desk one day, smiling as he mentioned the event. He told me that my speech had inspired many people in the company and that he saw great things ahead for me. My chest swelled with pride, and I realized that for the first time in my life, someone in authority, someone whose opinion truly mattered, believed in me. That belief lit a fire inside me that I knew would never burn out. At night, when I lay in bed now, I no longer stared at the ceiling with despair. Instead, I thought about the future. I thought about the possibility of studying further, traveling, building a career that was mine alone. I thought about the day I would move out, into a space of my own, where I could breathe freely without the constant weight of being dismissed. That award, that moment on stage, had changed everything. It wasn't just recognition, it was freedom. It was proof that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't worthless, that I had always been enough. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew that my story was only just beginning. And this time, it was one I would write for myself. Because from that night forward, I had finally stepped out of the shadows, and I would never go back again. The days after the event unfolded like a dream, but not the kind that fades when you wake up. This dream was alive, etched into my reality with every step I took into the office. Suddenly, I wasn't just another employee slipping quietly through the doors each morning. People smiled at me, stopped to say hello, and even asked my opinion during meetings. It was strange at first, almost uncomfortable because I wasn't used to being noticed. But soon I started to embrace it. For once, I wasn't invisible, and that feeling filled me with a strength I had never known before. At home, the shift was just as dramatic, but in a completely different way. My mother barely spoke to me. She avoided eye contact, her movements stiff, as though she didn't know how to address me anymore. My sister, on the other hand, burned with jealousy. She slammed doors, muttered under her breath, and made sarcastic remarks whenever I was in the room. It was as if the roles we had always played were suddenly reversed, and she couldn't stand it. I wasn't the silent provider anymore. I was someone she could no longer control, no longer belittle without consequence. One evening, she lashed out at me directly. She accused me of embarrassing the family, of making her look small by standing on that stage. Her words were sharp, her tone venomous, but for the first time I didn't crumble. I looked at her and told her calmly that her opinion no longer defined me. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. And when she realized she couldn't get a reaction from me, she stormed away in frustration. I sat in silence afterward, realizing that the power she had held over me for so long was gone. Meanwhile, at work, the responsibilities kept growing. My manager called me into his office one afternoon and told me the CEO wanted me to help lead a new project. It was bigger than anything I had ever handled before, and the thought of it terrified me. But beneath the fear was something stronger, excitement. This was what I had been waiting for, proof that I could build something lasting, something that belonged to me alone. I accepted without hesitation, even as my heart raced. Working on that project changed everything. I spent long nights in the office, pouring my energy into every detail, determined not to waste the opportunity. My colleagues began to look to me for guidance, asking questions, trusting my judgment. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into a new identity. I was no longer the quiet girl hiding behind others. I was leading, I was shaping outcomes, and people were listening. Every time I saw the project move forward, I felt myself grow stronger, surer of who I was becoming. At home, my mother tried once more to take my paycheck. Old habits die hard, and she reached out for the envelope as she always had. But this time I didn't let go. I held it firmly in my hand and told her calmly that things had changed. Her eyes widened in shock, as if she couldn't believe I had the courage to defy her. She argued, raised her voice, told me I was being ungrateful. But I didn't waver. I simply walked to my room with the envelope, my heart pounding but my back straight. For the first time, my salary was mine. The silence in the house grew heavier after that. My mother sulked, my sister seethed, but I felt lighter than I ever had before. The chains that had bound me for so long were finally breaking. I started saving more seriously, planning for the day I would move out. I imagined the apartment I would live in, the books I would read in peace, the mornings I would wake up without fear of being diminished. That vision of freedom fueled me, giving me the strength to keep moving forward, no matter how uncomfortable things became at home. One night, as I worked late on the project, the CEO stopped by my desk. He told me he had been watching my progress closely and that he was impressed. His words felt surreal, like something out of a story I never thought I'd be part of. He said I had leadership potential, that he believed I could go far in the company if I continued on this path. I nodded, trying to stay composed, but inside I was burning with pride. That simple acknowledgement was worth more than anything I had ever been denied at home. As weeks turned into months, the project I led was completed successfully. The company celebrated its results, and my name was attached to its success. Colleagues congratulated me, managers praised me, and even the CEO made a point of recognizing my contribution publicly once again. Each moment was like another brick in the foundation of the new life I was building, one where I no longer had to live in the shadows of anyone else. At home, the tension reached a breaking point. My sister could no longer hide her resentment. She shouted at me one evening, saying I thought I was better than everyone else now, that I was selfish for keeping what I earned. My mother tried to calm her down, but I stood my ground. I told them both that I wasn't better than anyone, but I was finally standing up for myself. I told them I had sacrificed enough, and that I deserved to live my own life. My words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for once neither of them had a response. From that day on, I started spending less time at home. I stayed late at the office, visited cafes, and even started looking at apartments online. I no longer felt tied down by their expectations or their cruelty. Every step I took toward independence filled me with strength. The more they tried to cling to the old patterns, the more I realized I had already broken free. The night I signed the lease for my first apartment, I sat alone on the floor of the empty space, holding the keys in my hand. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness, but of relief. For so long, I had lived under their control, convinced I wasn't enough, that I didn't matter. But here I was, proof that I had carved my own path, proof that I had survived and grown stronger. That empty room felt like freedom, and I knew it was only the beginning. Because I had learned something powerful. Sometimes, the recognition we crave doesn't come from those closest to us. Sometimes it comes from within, from the courage to keep going when no one believes in us. And once you discover your own worth, no one can ever take it away. That truth became my armor, my guiding light, as I stepped fully into the life I was meant to build. One where I no longer begged to be seen, because I had finally learned to see myself. Of course, freedom didn't erase the scars. At night, I sometimes heard my sister's mocking voice in my head, or remembered the way my mother brushed me aside as if I were nothing. Those memories didn't vanish just because I had left. But now, when they surfaced, I fought them with new memories. The applause at the event, the CEO's words of recognition, the feeling of holding my first paycheck without handing it over. Slowly, the pain began to transform into something else. Not weakness, but strength. Not chains, but lessons. At work, my responsibilities kept growing. The project I had led opened doors for me, and suddenly, opportunities I had never imagined were being offered. My colleagues treated me with respect, not just as a worker, but as a leader. And though I still struggled with self-doubt at times, I reminded myself of how far I had come. Each new challenge was proof that I was not the invisible girl I had once believed myself to be. I was capable, and I had earned my place. My relationship with my family remained strained. My mother called occasionally, her voice softer now, almost cautious, as if she knew I had slipped out of her control. She sometimes asked me to come by, to visit, but I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the guilt she didn't know how to admit. My sister, on the other hand, stayed bitter. She sent me messages filled with envy, reminding me that she was still the one who deserved more, still the one who should have been in my position. I didn't respond. I no longer owed her anything. One evening, while I was working late, the CEO stopped by my desk again. He told me about a new opportunity, a chance to travel abroad for a training program that only a handful of employees would be chosen for. My heart raced as he explained that he thought I was ready, that he believed I could represent the company well. I wanted to cry right there, because this was more than just a job offer. It was validation. It was proof that I was not only capable, but worthy of trust, worthy of investment, worthy of a future. When I received the official confirmation weeks later, I held the letter in my hands and thought about that first paycheck, the one my mother had handed to my sister without a second thought. I thought about how invisible I had felt, how small, how worthless. And now here I was, chosen to represent an entire company, recognized not for who my family wanted me to be, but for who I truly was. The contrast was so sharp it made me dizzy. The night before my departure, I visited my old home one last time. My mother greeted me at the door, her eyes tired, her face older than I remembered. She didn't scold me, didn't demand money, didn't try to control me. Instead, she looked at me with something I had longed to see my entire life: regret. My sister was there too, arms crossed, glaring as always. But this time, her glare didn't touch me. I was no longer the girl who shrank under her shadow. I was someone who had broken free, someone who had built her own light. I didn't stay long. I sat at the table with my mother, listened as she fumbled through half apologies, excuses tangled with guilt. I didn't lash out, didn't raise my voice. I simply told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying the weight of her choices had nearly destroyed me once. I wasn't going to let it chain me anymore. My sister scoffed, muttered under her breath, but I didn't even look at her. My focus was forward now, not behind. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt lighter than I ever had. The world outside seemed brighter, wider, full of possibility. The journey ahead scared me, but it also thrilled me. I was finally living a life of my own design, no longer bound by the expectations and dismissals of others. My paycheck, my work, my future, they belonged to me now. And as the plane took off the next morning, carrying me toward new horizons, I looked out the window and thought about everything that had led me here. The humiliation, the betrayal, the endless nights of doubt. They had once felt like chains, but now I saw them for what they truly were. They were the fire that had forged me, the trials that had shaped me into someone stronger than I ever believed I could be. My story had begun with loss, with being stripped of the very thing I had earned, but it was ending with freedom, with strength, with a life that was finally mine. And as I soared through the clouds, I promised myself one thing: I would never let anyone silence me again. Because I had discovered the most important truth of all: my worth was never theirs to give. It had always been mine to claim. When the plane touched down in the new city, I felt as though I had stepped into another life. The air was different, crisp and full of possibility. As I wheeled my small suitcase through the airport, I caught my reflection in the glass walls and hardly recognized myself. I was no longer the timid girl who handed over her paycheck without protest. I was someone who had fought through betrayal, endured humiliation, and emerged stronger. I was here not because someone gave me a chance out of pity, but because I had earned it. The company's training program was intense. Each day, I was surrounded by people from all over the world, ambitious and talented, all striving to prove themselves. At first, I worried I didn't belong, that my quiet nature would make me fade into the background again. But then I remembered the stage, the applause, the CEO's words. I carried that moment with me like a shield. Whenever doubt crept in, I reminded myself that I had already overcome far worse. Slowly, my confidence grew. I made friends with colleagues from different countries, people who respected me for my dedication, not for where I came from or who my family was. For the first time, I felt like I was being valued for who I truly was. We shared stories over coffee, laughed during late-night study sessions, and supported each other through the demanding schedule. They didn't see me as invisible, and their respect felt like sunlight breaking through clouds I had lived under for far too long. Back home, my mother began calling more often. At first, I ignored the calls, afraid of reopening old wounds. But eventually, I answered. Her voice was softer now, almost fragile. She told me she had been thinking a lot about the past, about the way she had treated me. She admitted, in her own stumbling way, that she had been wrong. Hearing those words I had once begged for, didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. Instead, it brought peace. I had already moved past needing her validation. Her regret was her burden, not mine. My sister, however, never changed. She sent bitter messages, full of anger and jealousy. She claimed I had abandoned the family, that I had stolen the life she was meant to have. I didn't respond. I no longer had the energy to fight battles that no longer mattered. Her words were echoes from a past I had left behind, and with every silence I gave her, I felt freer. As the weeks went on, the training program concluded with a final presentation. Each participant had to showcase what they had learned, applying it to a real-world project. I worked tirelessly, pouring myself into my presentation, determined to prove my worth once more. When I stood in front of the audience, nervous but steady, I felt echoes of that company event where it had all begun. My voice was clear, my ideas strong, and when I finished, the applause filled the room. Once again, I had been seen, After the presentation, the CEO approached me. He told me he was proud of my growth, that I had exceeded expectations. He offered me a promotion, one that would change the entire course of my career. My hands shook as I accepted, overwhelmed by the reality that I had gone from being invisible in my own home to being recognized on a global stage. It was more than a promotion. It was proof that I had rewritten my story. That night, I sat by the hotel window, staring out at the city lights. My journey replayed in my mind like a movie. The first paycheck snatched from my hands, the nights of silent tears, the humiliation at home, the moment on stage when everything shifted, the freedom of my first apartment, and now, this. Every pain, every injustice had led me here, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt gratitude, not for the cruelty itself, but for the strength it had forced me to build. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was for anyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, dismissed, anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. I wanted people to know that even in the deepest shadows, it was possible to find your light, that you didn't need permission to claim your worth, that no one could define your value but you. When I returned home after the program, I didn't go straight to my mother's house. I went to my apartment, my sanctuary, and placed the new certificate on the wall beside the first one. Side by side, they told the story of my journey, from invisibility to recognition, from silence to strength. I stood there for a long time, letting the weight of it all sink in. The calls from my mother continued, and though I answered sometimes, I never went back to the old life. I had forgiven her, but forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant moving forward, building a life where I was no longer defined by her choices. My sister eventually stopped reaching out altogether, her bitterness fading into silence. And for me, that silence was a blessing. The years ahead stretched wide with promise. I didn't know exactly where my journey would take me, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again hand over what was mine. Not my paycheck, not my dreams, not my voice, not my worth. Those belonged to me and me alone. And as I lay in bed that night, the city humming softly outside my window, I closed my eyes with a quiet smile. My story had begun with loss, but it had ended with victory. I had found my strength, my freedom, my future, and the world would never make me invisible again. My journey began with humiliation, betrayal, and silence, but it led me to freedom, recognition, and strength I never knew I had. I learned that my worth was never something to be handed over. It was mine to claim, mine to protect, and mine to live by. No matter how invisible you may feel, your light can never truly be dimmed unless you let it. If you made it to the end of this story, leave a comment saying I made it so I know you were here with me until the last word. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of my next stories. This is just the beginning, and I want you right here with me as we grow together.